Hello, I'm just here to demonstrate how I can look at the camera and talk in a neutral mood. This is one continuous, unbroken shot without any camera movement or cuts.
Christopher Nolan's adaptation of one of the oldest stories ever told just had one of the biggest opening weekends of the year. And somehow, in the same 48 hours, it also became the target of one of the most brutal reviews a Nolan film has ever received. Nolan's The Odyssey opened in theaters on July 17, 2026, distributed by Universal Pictures, running nearly 3 hours and shot using new IMAX film cameras for the first time in movie history. According to Hollywood Reporter's reporting from the morning after opening night, the film brought in $51.2 million on Friday alone across roughly 3,900 North American screens, including Thursday preview business, earning an A cinema score from audiences. As of that Saturday morning report, the film was tracking toward a domestic opening weekend north of $120 million. Worth noting that figure was still a projection at the time of that reporting, not yet a confirmed final tally, and studios had actually been targeting something closer to the $80 to $100 million range before the film dramatically outperformed those early estimates. Globally, the film was projected to bring in roughly $257.8 million for the weekend, including $137.3 million from 73 international markets. To put those numbers in context, this would mark the third biggest domestic opening weekend of Nolan's career, trailing only his two Dark Knight films, and it would become his single biggest global opening ever, surpassing The Dark Knight Rises' worldwide launch. It's also happening under different circumstances than his last film. Oppenheimer opened in 2023 alongside Barbie, as part of the massive Barbenheimer cultural moment, while The Odyssey has the weekend entirely to itself.
Okay, so right away, this sounds like a boring regulatory story, and I get why your brain wants to skip past it. But stay with me because this is actually about something huge. Can a president just turn off money Congress already promised whenever he feels like it? That's not a small question. Here's the part I want you to really sit with. That clause was written in 2020 during Trump's first term. It sat there basically unused for years. It's not like this administration invented some sneaky new loophole out of nowhere. They found an old tool and decided to actually pick it up and swing it. That's an important distinction because it changes the story from shady new scheme to existing rule aggressive new interpretation. And notice the list of programs that got hit: school lunch programs, hate crime prevention initiatives, university research. These aren't abstract line items, these are things that touch real people's daily lives. That's exactly why 23 states didn't just complain on Twitter, they went to federal court.
As the only new wide release. So who's telling this story and what's it actually about? Matt Damon stars as Odysseus, the Greek king of Ithaca, spending 10 years trying to make it home to his wife Penelope, played by Anne Hathaway, and the grown son he barely knows, Telemachus, played by Tom Holland, after the fall of Troy. Robert Pattinson plays Antinous, one of the suitors circling Penelope back home. Zendaya plays the goddess Athena. Lupita Nyong'o plays a dual role as Helen of Troy and her sister Clytemnestra. Charlize Theron plays the nymph Calypso, and Samantha Morton plays the sorceress Circe. For context on the underlying myth, because this is genuinely one of the oldest surviving stories in human history, the film is based on Homer's ancient Greek epic poem. According to reporting, historians generally agree some real conflict likely did take place between the Greeks and the people of ancient Anatolia, in what's now Turkey, where Troy was located, though the poem probably compresses several real skirmishes, raids, and trade disputes into the legendary 10-year siege depicted in the story. The war itself, as the story goes, began over Helen, married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta, after Paris of Troy either seduced her or abducted her. Accounts genuinely differ on which, though Homer's version leans toward the seduction telling. Menelaus's brother Agamemnon then led the Greek coalition into a decade-long siege of Troy, which the Greeks ultimately won using Odysseus's Trojan horse strategy. The film picks up roughly a decade after that war ends, following Odysseus's own 10-year journey home, meaning by the time he reaches Ithaca, he'll have been gone 20 years total.
I actually really appreciate that the script flags the discrepancy in the state count instead of just picking a number and moving on. 20 states plus 3 governors plus DC, or 23 states plus DC, different outlets, slightly different numbers. That's a good instinct to have anytime you're consuming news. When the exact figure is fuzzy, don't build your outrage on the fuzzy number, build it on the part everyone agrees on. And everyone agrees this was a large, coordinated, Democratic-led legal challenge. Now here's the actual legal argument, and honestly, it's a pretty clean one. Congress controls the money, not the White House Budget Office. If Congress appropriates funds for a program, the executive branch doesn't get to unilaterally redecide what that money is really for after the fact. Judge Talwani's line here is the whole ballgame. You can set expectations before the grant is awarded, but you can't rewrite the rules after the money's already out the door. I think a lot of people online are going to read this as Judge blocks Trump, full stop, partisan scoreboard, move on. And look, I'm not going to pretend the ideological split here isn't obvious. Talwani was an Obama appointee. The plaintiffs are all Democratic-led states. But the actual reasoning she used isn't really a partisan argument. It's a pretty basic separation of powers argument that would apply to any administration trying to pull this move. That's worth remembering before you file this away as purely a red versus blue story.
Now here's where the story splits into a genuinely contested critical divide, and it's worth walking through both sides rather than picking one. On one side, reception across most major outlets has been remarkably strong. According to Hollywood Reporter's own figures, the film was sitting at a 95% critics score on Rotten Tomatoes, reportedly the best of Nolan's career, edging out The Dark Knight and Memento, alongside a 97% audience score. It's worth flagging that this specific figure differs slightly from some other reporting circulating elsewhere, which has cited scores closer to 96% on both counts. The exact numbers appear to have shifted slightly as more reviews came in, so treat the precise percentage as a moving target rather than a fixed fact. THR's own chief film critic described the movie as a meditative action film that manages to feel both sweeping and personal, while noting its pacing suffers somewhat from the naturally episodic structure of the source material and a few casting choices he considered questionable. THR's internal ranking of Nolan's filmography reportedly places the Odyssey second overall, behind only The Dark Knight.
This is the part of the story I think deserves way more attention than it's getting, and I want to slow down here. This was only partial summary judgment. 2 other counts in the lawsuit are still sitting there unresolved. This case is not over. If you clip this video down to just judge rules against Trump, you're already oversimplifying what actually happened in that courtroom. But here's the detail that I think is genuinely the most important sentence in the entire script, and it's easy to blow right past it. This ruling does not give back any money that's already been cut. 0. If a program already lost its funding under this clause, this ruling does not resurrect it. The states weren't even asking for that. They specifically asked the court to protect future funding, not to claw back what's already gone. That's a really important thing to sit with if you're someone who works at or benefits from one of these programs. This isn't a everything's fixed now story. It's a the bleeding stops here, but the wound from before is still their story. I think a lot of casual news consumers are going to walk away thinking this ruling undid the damage, and it just didn't.
On the other side, Time published one of the most negative reviews the film has received from any major outlet, and it's worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as an outlier, since it raises specific, detailed criticisms rather than vague dismissal. The reviewer's core argument was that despite the technical ambition and scale, the film ultimately fails to translate the sprawling, episodic nature of Homer's poem into something that flows as a cohesive piece of cinema, comparing it unfavorably to a smaller, lesser-known 2024 adaptation of the same material's final stretch, which the reviewer felt captured more genuine emotional texture with far less resources. Specific criticisms included: Tom Holland's Telemachus was described as underwritten to the point of blandness. The design of supporting soldiers' helmets was mocked as cartoonish. Long sequences involving Calypso were criticized as pacing dead zones.
$5.39 billion, over 1,100 grants. Those are not small numbers, and I think when a figure gets that big, it can actually become abstract and lose its emotional weight, like our brains aren't built to feel the difference between $1 billion and $5 billion. So when you hear that number, I want you to reframe it. That's thousands of individual programs, individual towns, individual research labs, individual school districts, all sitting in legal limbo waiting to find out if their funding survives. And can we talk about the reaction gap here for a second? New Jersey's Attorney General came out swinging, important win, administration defied the law, strong, quotable, confident language. Meanwhile, the White House, total silence. No immediate comments. Now, I'm not going to tell you that silence automatically means guilt or that they have no defense. Sometimes no comment just means our lawyers told us not to talk yet. But in the court of public opinion, silence next to a confident, well-quoted opponent is never a great look, and I think that's part of why the coverage on this has leaned the way it has.
And a pivotal emotional beat involving Odysseus's dying dog Argus was singled out as rushed past almost mechanically. The one sequence the reviewer praised without reservation was Circe turning Odysseus's men into swine, calling it the strongest scene in the film. The review also raised a specific critique of Nyong'o's dual casting, arguing not that the casting itself was the problem, but that the film gives her almost nothing substantial to do with either role, which the reviewer characterized as a missed opportunity rather than a bold choice.
I really want to highlight how careful the script is here because this is exactly the kind of thing that gets mangled in secondhand reporting. It says an appeal is reasonable to expect, not confirmed. That's the right way to talk about this. There is no reporting yet that says the administration has actually filed anything. If you see a headline this week claiming Trump appeals grant ruling as a done deal, go check the sourcing before you believe it because as of right now, that hasn't happened. What we do know for certain, for now in this jurisdiction, agencies can't use this specific clause to yank funding based on priorities that popped up after the grant was already awarded. That's real. That's not nothing. But it's also not the end of the story. There's still pending litigation, there's still no restored funding for past cuts, and there's still a very real possibility this gets appealed and looks completely different in 6 months. So here's my honest read. This is a genuine, meaningful check on executive overreach, but it's a narrower, more fragile win than the headlines are making it sound. Keep watching this one.
It's genuinely useful to sit with the fact that both of these takes exist simultaneously about the same film. A 5 percentage point average critic's score doesn't erase a detailed, specific pan from a major outlet, and a single harsh review doesn't undo what appears to be broad audience enthusiasm reflected in the box office numbers and cinema score. Both things are true at once, and that tension is arguably a more interesting story than either take on its own. Beyond the reviews, there's a real industry story tied to the box office numbers. The film's IMAX exclusivity is a meaningful part of its financial performance. It's projected to earn roughly $30 million domestically from IMAX screens alone, about 25% of its total North American haul, plus another $22 million internationally from IMAX showings, with only 25 U.S. theaters currently capable of screening the true IMAX 17 film format. That premium format push also affects the rest of the summer calendar. Reporting notes that next weekend has no new wide releases at all, leaving a gap between the Odyssey and Sony's Spider-Man. Brand New Day, which opens July 31 starring Tom Holland and Zendaya, both of whom also appear in the Odyssey. There's also a competing draw this specific weekend worth mentioning. The World Cup final between Spain and Argentina was taking place the same Sunday, which some reporting flagged as a potential source of competition for movie-going audiences, though there's no confirmed data yet on how much that actually affected turnout.
So here's my final verdict. This is a real legal win for the states, but it's a partial one. It doesn't undo the damage that's already been done, and the fight is far from over. Judge Talwani drew a clear, sensible line. Set your priorities before the money goes out. Don't rewrite them after. That's not radical. That's just how appropriations are supposed to work. But I want to hear from you. If you had to bet on what happens next, which one are you picking? A, the administration appeals and this eventually gets overturned. B, the administration quietly lets it stand and finds a different legal angle instead. C, this becomes the first domino in a much bigger fight over executive funding power. D, nothing changes in practice. Future terminations just get relabeled to avoid this exact clause. Drop your letter in the comments and tell me why. And if breakdowns like this, the stuff mainstream coverage skips past, are useful to you, make sure you're subscribed to Janine Reacts, because we're going to keep digging into the parts of the story that actually matter.
So what's the actual bottom line here, and what's still uncertain? Confirmed. The film opened enormously, on pace for one of the biggest launches of Nolan's career and of the year overall. Confirmed. Critical response overall skews strongly positive by the numbers. Also confirmed. At least one major outlet published a detailed, substantive takedown that isn't just contrarian noise. It raises specific structural criticisms about pacing, underused actors, and emotional beats that don't land. What's not yet confirmed is the final locked-in opening weekend total, since the reporting available was published Saturday morning based on Friday's numbers. And exact critic score percentages appear to vary slightly depending on which point in time or which aggregator is cited. On screen, this is a visually rich story to work with. Side-by-side box office bar charts comparing this opening to Oppenheimer's and to Nolan's Dark Knight films. Film stills of the IMAX shot landscapes across Italy, Greece, Morocco, Iceland, and Scotland. A cast collage highlighting the ensemble, and a simple visual split showing the strong critic score percentage next to a pull quote representing the harsher review, to visually represent the genuine divide in reception rather than flattening it into one narrative. Bottom line, Christopher Nolan just delivered what looks like one of the biggest openings of his career, backed by strong scores across most outlets. And at the exact same time, a detailed, credible pan from a major publication is making the case that the spectacle doesn't fully cohere into a satisfying film. Both of those stories are happening simultaneously, and neither cancels the other out.